My brother sold our family's $5 million estate while I was in a coma, then he tried to ban me from my own father's funeral. My brother liquidated our entire family estate while I was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, and then he tried to bar me from saying a final goodbye to our father. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the calculated way he tried to erase my existence from our family's history. My father passed away 4 weeks ago, right as I was finally regaining consciousness after a devastating car accident that had kept me in a coma for 3 months. While I was fighting for my life, my brother, Leo, was busy signing away my inheritance. Leo hasn't allowed me to see any of the legal documents regarding the estate. Not the will our father updated 2 years ago, not the deeds to the properties that have been in our family for 3 generations, not even the small personal items my mother left to me before she passed. Leo's family, his wife and her brothers, have been living in our childhood home every single day. They've already started redecorating, throwing out my belongings like they were trash. But when I called from the rehab center asking when I could come home to recover, Leo started lecturing me about stress and property management. The excuses kept changing. First, it was because the house was a construction zone and unsafe for someone in my condition. Then it was about the legal complexities of the probate process, claiming that my medical status made me legally incompetent to handle affairs, even though my doctors had cleared me. Then it was about the peace of his own children, claiming that seeing me in a wheelchair would be traumatic for my nieces. Meanwhile, his wife's family was throwing massive dinner parties in our dining room, drinking the vintage wine my father had saved for my eventual wedding. My aunt offered to come stay with me, to help me navigate the paperwork, and to drive me to the cemetery so I could finally visit my father's grave. Leo told her that was interfering and divisive. When my best friend tried to drop off a box of my old journals he'd saved from the curb, Leo's wife called the police, claiming he was trespassing and harassing a grieving family. I felt like I was being buried alive. I was a grieving son, a survivor, and I couldn't even mourn the man who raised me because my own brother had turned the family home into a fortress. The breaking point came when my lawyer called me. He'd been trying to reach me for months, but Leo had told him I was in a persistent vegetative state and that Leo had been granted total power of attorney. He told me that Leo was planning to sell the family's mountain cabin, the one place our father specifically told me would always be my sanctuary. Leo heard me on the phone with the nurse and came into my room, screaming that I was ungrateful for the way he'd managed the burden of our father's death. He grabbed my hospital-issued tablet and told my lawyer that I was having a mental breakdown due to my brain injury and hung up. My lawyer was so confused he almost filed for a competency hearing against me. That's when Leo's own assistant, Sarah, reached out to me. She'd been working for the family business for 10 years and couldn't watch Leo destroy me. She asked to meet my aunt in secret, saying she had proof of what was really happening. Sarah sat my aunt down and showed her the digital trail. This wasn't about managing the estate. Leo had been in deep gambling debt for years. He'd been planning to liquidate the family assets the moment my father's heart stopped. He'd been telling the board of directors that I was brain dead, making sure no one would look for me or ask for my signature. Sarah showed my aunt a group chat between Leo, his wife, and a shady real estate developer. The messages were sickening. Leo had written, "I'm going to make sure he stays in that rehab facility until the final sale clears. By the time he's strong enough to walk out, there won't be a cent left for him to sue me with. He needs to realize I'm the one in charge now." His wife replied, "Good. He always was the favorite. It's time we got what's ours." Sarah explained that Leo had a strategy to keep me drugged or distracted by medical bills until the statute of limitations on the inheritance challenge ran out. He wasn't protecting my health, he was running a clock. He was using my accident as a window to strip me of my birthright. The information Sarah provided was like a second physical blow, worse than the car accident itself. I spent that night in the hospital staring at the ceiling, the sound of the heart monitor mocking me. Every beep felt like a second of my life Leo was stealing. I knew I couldn't just sit there. 2 days later, against my doctor's advice, but with my aunt's help, I checked myself out. I arrived at my childhood home in a wheelchair, my legs still weak, but my mind sharper than it had been in months. When we pulled into the driveway, I didn't recognize the place. My father's vintage truck was gone. The oak tree I used to climb had been pruned back so aggressively it looked like a skeleton. As my aunt helped me toward the front door, the Ring camera whistled. Before I could even reach for the handle, the door swung open. It wasn't Leo who stood there, but his brother-in-law, a man I'd met maybe twice at Christmas. He blocked the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, looking at me with a mix of pity and annoyance. "You shouldn't be here, Elias," he said, not even using a welcoming tone. "Leo said you were still in the high-dependency unit. You're trespassing." "Trespassing?" I scoffed, my voice raspy from the months of the ventilator. "This is my house. My father's name is on that deed, and mine is in his will. Move." He didn't budge. Instead, he pulled out his phone and started filming me. "You're agitated, Elias. You're showing signs of the brain trauma Leo warned us about." I'm calling him. Within minutes, Leo's SUV roared into the driveway. He didn't even check to see if I was okay or how I'd managed to leave the hospital. He jumped out of the car red-faced, screaming at my aunt for kidnapping me from my medical care. Leo stood in front of my wheelchair, towering over me. He didn't look like my brother. He looked like a predator guarding a kill. You're sick, Elias. You're confused, he hissed, leaning down so only I could hear him. The house is being staged for sale. Your junk is in a storage unit across town. If you set foot on this porch again, I'll have the police escort you back to the psych ward. For your own safety, of course. My aunt tried to intervene, showing him the discharge papers, but Leo swiped them out of her hand. He told her she was being written out of the family for enabling my delusions. He then turned to his brother-in-law and told him to lock the gates. As we were forced to back down the driveway, I saw his wife watching from the upstairs window, the same window I used to look out of every morning. She was holding my father's gold watch, the one he'd promised me on his deathbed. She saw me looking, and she didn't wave. She just closed the curtains. Being forced off my own property was the lowest point of my recovery, but it ignited a fire in me that no physical therapy ever could. My aunt took me back to her small apartment, and we spent the next 48 hours hunched over a laptop. We weren't just looking for memories anymore, we were looking for blood. I reached back out to Sarah, Leo's assistant, who is now risking her entire career to help me. She met us at a nondescript diner on the edge of town, sliding a thick manila envelope across the table like we were in a spy movie. Inside was the evidence that turned my brother's management into a criminal conspiracy. The documents revealed that Leo hadn't just been handling the estate, he had actively bribed our family's longtime estate attorney, Mr. Henderson. There was a copy of a wire transfer for $50,000 from Leo's personal account to an offshore entity linked to Henderson's firm. In exchange, Henderson had misplaced the original copy of our father's 2024 will, the one that split everything 50/50ths, and instead presented an outdated version from a decade ago that gave Leo full executive control. But the betrayal went even deeper. Sarah had managed to print out a series of internal memos. Leo was planning to sell our father's manufacturing company to a shell corporation he partially owned for pennies on the dollar. He was literally stealing from the future of our family to pay off his own mounting debts. Seeing the numbers on the page made me nauseous. My father had spent 40 years building that company, treating his employees like family, and Leo was dismantling it in 40 days. While I was reading, my phone buzzed with a notification from a local news site. Leo had released a press statement. It was a photo of him standing in front of our father's grave, looking somber and heartbroken. The caption read, "Taking on the mantle of leadership while my dear brother remains incapacitated is the hardest thing I've ever done. We pray for his recovery, but the business must move forward for the sake of our employees." The comments were filled with people praising Leo for his strength and dedication. It was a masterclass in gaslighting an entire community. He was painting me as a ghost, a tragic figure who is no longer capable of holding a thought, let alone a legacy. My aunt gripped my hand as I scrolled through the messages. "We have the proof now, Elias," she whispered. "He thinks you're too weak to fight, but he doesn't realize you've already woken up." I looked at the wire transfer again. It was time to stop being the victim and start being the heir my father actually raised. The following Monday was the annual shareholders meeting for my father's company, Miller Industries. Historically, it was a day of celebration, but this year, Leo had framed it as a restructuring summit. Sarah had tipped us off that the vote to sell the company to the Shell Corporation was the first item on the agenda. I knew that if that vote passed, the company and my inheritance would be legally out of reach. I spent the morning in a suit that hung a bit loose on my frame, my aunt studying my hand as I practiced standing for more than 5 minutes at a time. I wasn't just going there to talk, I was going there to reclaim my name. We arrived at the corporate headquarters 10 minutes after the meeting had started. The security guards at the front desk, men who had known my father for decades, looked like they'd seen a ghost when I rolled into the lobby. They didn't stop me. One of them, a man named Gary, simply nodded and held the elevator door open. "Good to see you back, Mr. Elias," he whispered. It was the first time in weeks I felt like I actually existed. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, I could hear Leo's voice booming from the boardroom. He was mid-presentation, showing a slide deck about efficiency and necessary sacrifices. I signaled for my aunt to stay back, and I stood up from the wheelchair. Using a cane for support, I pushed the heavy oak doors open. The room went silent. 30 of the most powerful people in our industry turned their heads. Leo froze, his laser pointer trembling against the projection screen. "I hope I'm not too late for the vote," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden stillness. I walked slowly, painfully, but steadily, to the empty chair at the head of the table, the one that had belonged to my father. Leo recovered quickly, his face twisting into a mask of fake concern. "Elias, what are you doing here? You should be in bed. Someone call his nurses." He started toward me, trying to grab my arm to lead me out, but I held up the manila envelope Sarah had given me. "I'm not here for a checkup, Leo," I said, looking directly at the board of directors. "I'm here because my brother has been lying to you about my medical status, my father's will, and the true destination of the funds from this proposed sale." I dropped the offshore wire transfer documents onto the table. The lead board member, a woman who had been my father's closest confidant, picked them up. Her eyes widened as she read the names. Leo's face went from pale to a deep, panicked purple. The restructuring was about to become a reckoning. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. Leo tried to laugh it off, a dry, nervous sound that didn't reach his eyes. "These are forgeries," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the documents on the table. "Elias is suffering from post-traumatic delusions. He's been manipulated by disgruntled employees. You can't possibly take the word of a man who was in a coma 3 weeks ago over your acting CEO." He looked around the room, pleading with his eyes for someone to support him, but the board members remained stone-faced. They were looking at the wire transfers, then at me, then at Leo's sweating brow. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "If they are forgeries, Leo, then you won't mind if we call Mr. Henderson in here right now to verify the 2024 will," I said calmly. At the mention of the attorney, Leo's composure completely shattered. He knew the house of cards was falling. He gestured for his personal security team to enter the room, claiming I was a medical liability that needed to be removed for my own safety. But Gary and the other building guards were already standing at the door, and they weren't moving for Leo's men. Seeing that he was trapped, Leo asked for a 5-minute recess to speak with his brother privately. The board granted it, and we moved into a side office. The moment the door closed, Leo's concerned brother act vanished. He grabbed me by the lapels of my suit, his breath smelling of stale coffee and panic. "Listen to me, you little brat," he hissed. "I'll give you $2 million. Cash. Right now. I'll set up a trust that pays out every month for the rest of your life. You just have to walk back out there, tell them you were confused, and let the sale go through. If you don't, I'll tie this up in court for the next 10 years. You'll die of old age before you see a penny of Dad's money." I looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. This wasn't the brother I grew up with, this was a man hollowed out by greed. I screamed as they led him out. "I still have the house. I still have everything you actually care about." He didn't realize that the house was just wood and stone. I had already reclaimed the truth. With Leo in custody for questioning, I didn't waste a single moment. I knew the window of opportunity was small. While the lawyers scrambled to freeze the corporate accounts, I took my aunt and a licensed locksmith back to the family estate. I wasn't going to wait for a court order to sleep in my own bed. As we pulled up the long, winding driveway, I saw that the for sale sign had already been defaced with red spray paint. News of the boardroom scandal was traveling fast in our small town. The front door was bolted from the inside. When the locksmith began his work, the second-floor window flew open. Leo's wife, Elena, leaned out, her hair disheveled and her voice shrill. "Get off this property," she screamed. "Leo is calling the high court. You have no right to be here, you invalid." She was clutching a heavy designer bag, and I could see her through the glass throwing jewelry and small silver frames into an open suitcase. She wasn't just defending the house, she was looting it. "The locks are being changed, Elena," I shouted back, my voice gaining strength with every word. "The police have the recordings of Leo's bribe. Your power of attorney is being nullified as we speak. You have 20 minutes to pack a single suitcase and leave, or I'll have the sheriff's department assist you." I watched her face turn from rage to pure, cold calculation. She realized the game was up. 5 minutes later, she opened the front door. She didn't look at me as she stepped onto the porch, 2 oversized suitcases dragging behind her. But as she passed my wheelchair, she stopped and leaned in close. "You think you're the hero, Elias?" she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "Your father knew Leo was a snake. He left it all to both of you because he was too weak to admit he'd raised a monster. This house is hollow now. I've made sure of that." She walked to her car and peeled away, leaving the front door wide open. I rolled over the threshold, the familiar scent of my father's pipe tobacco still lingering beneath the sharp smell of the industrial cleaners Elena had used to sanitize my life. I headed straight for the study. The room was a disaster, drawers pulled out, files scattered everywhere. But behind the portrait of our grandfather, the small wall safe remained intact. Elena hadn't found the key. I reached into the hidden compartment of my wheelchair where I'd tucked my father's spare set. My heart hammered against my ribs as the lock clicked open. Inside wasn't just money or deeds, it was the one thing Leo could never sell, our father's personal journals. The journals were leather-bound and smelled of old paper and the cedar wood of the study. As I turned the pages, I expected to find business strategies or perhaps words of disappointment regarding Leo's gambling. Instead, I found a series of entries from the final months of my father's life that painted a much darker picture. It turned out that Leo's betrayal hadn't started with my accident. It had started years ago. My father had discovered that Leo wasn't just losing money, he was embezzling from the company to fund a secret life, including a series of failed offshore developments that were nothing more than money laundering fronts. But the real shock came in an entry dated just 3 days before my car crash. My father had written, "I've confronted Leo. I told him I'm removing him from the will entirely." He didn't even argue. He just looked at me with a coldness I've never seen in a human being. He knows Elias is the only one who can save Miller Industries now. I fear for Elias. Leo knows that if something happens to me, Elias is the only obstacle left. My hands shook so hard the journal nearly fell. My accident, the brake failure on that rainy night, suddenly didn't feel like an accident anymore. I remembered the way Leo had insisted on taking my car to the shop for a tune-up the week before. I remembered how he had been the one to suggest I take the mountain pass instead of the highway because of construction. The realization that my own brother might have tried to kill me for a payout made the room spin. I called my attorney, Samir, and told him he needed to get a forensic team on my old car immediately, even though it had been sitting in a junkyard for months. Samir sounded grave. Elias, if we can prove mechanical tampering, this goes from white-collar fraud to attempted murder. Are you sure you want to open this door? He didn't just try to steal my money, Samir, I whispered, looking at my father's handwriting. He tried to erase the person our father loved most. Open every door. Burn the whole house down if you have to. As I sat in the dim light of the study, I realized why Elena had been so desperate to leave. She wasn't just running from a scandal, she was running from a crime scene. I looked out the window and saw a black sedan pull up to the gate. It wasn't the police, and it wasn't my aunt. It was Leo's lawyer, and he looked like he was carrying a white flag made of legal summons. The black sedan belonged to Marcus Thorne, a man known as the vulture of the local legal scene. He didn't come in with the arrogance I expected. He walked into the study, took one look at the open safe and the journals in my lap, and sighed. He knew the leverage had shifted. Elias, he began, settling into the chair across from me without being asked. Leo is in a very difficult position. The board is filing for a full audit, and the DA is looking at the wire transfers. However, we are prepared to sign over the house, the cabin, and your full shares immediately, no court battle, if you sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop the civil suit. I looked at him, feeling a cold calm settle over me. What about the car, Marcus? The color drained from his face. He tried to maintain his professional mask, but his eyes darted to the door. The car was a tragedy, Elias. A mechanical failure. Surely you aren't suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, I interrupted. I'm stating a fact. My father's journals mention Leo's access to my vehicle. And I just received a text from the forensic specialist Samir hired. They found traces of a corrosive agent in the brake lines, something that doesn't happen from wear and tear. It was a slow-acting sabotage. Marcus stood up abruptly. He didn't even try to counter the claim. He knew that if the police had that evidence, his client wasn't just going to prison for fraud, he was going for life. I'll speak with my client, he said, his voice clipped. He practically ran out of the house. An hour later, Samir called. The news was even more explosive than the journals. The shell corporation Leo had been using to buy the family company wasn't just a tax dodge, it was owned by a rival firm that had been trying to bankrupt our father for decades. Leo hadn't just been stealing, he had been a traitor to everything our father had built. He was selling our legacy to our biggest enemy out of pure spite. While Samir spoke, I walked, out onto the balcony. My legs were screaming in pain, but the air felt different. I saw a news crew gathering at the end of the driveway. They weren't there for Leo's fake press releases anymore. They were there for the truth. I realized that for the first time since I woke up from that coma, I wasn't the victim in the story. I was the one holding the pen. 2 days before the grand jury was set to convene, I received a frantic call from the county jail. It was Leo. He wasn't screaming or demanding anymore. He sounded like a man who had finally realized the walls were closing in. He begged me to come see him, claiming he had one last secret our father had kept from both of us. Against Samir's advice, I went. I didn't go because I trusted him. I went because I needed to look him in the eye one last time. I wore a small, high-fidelity recording device hidden beneath my necktie, a gift from Sarah, who is now officially my acting chief of staff. The visiting room was cold and smelled of floor wax and despair. Leo sat behind the glass, looking 10 years older than he had at the board meeting. His designer suit had been replaced by a rough orange jumpsuit. You think you're so righteous, Elias, he spat, his voice cracking. But Dad was the one who started this. He was going to leave me with nothing after I gave 15 years to that company. I did what I had to do to survive. The car? That was supposed to just keep you in the hospital for a few weeks, long enough for me to clear the debts. I didn't mean for it to be a coma. You admit it then, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's. You sabotaged the brakes. Leo laughed, a jagged, ugly sound. It was easy. You always were too trusting. Just like Dad. He actually believed I was managing his accounts while he was dying. I watched him sign those papers thinking he was securing your future when he was really signing my get-out-of-jail-free card. I'd do it all again, Elias. Every single bit of it. The only mistake I made was not making sure you stayed under. He leaned into the glass, his eyes wide and bloodshot. The board won't convict me. I have enough dirt on them to bury the whole town. You might have the house back, but you'll never have the peace of mind. Every time you start your car, every time you take a pill, you'll wonder if I'm still there. I didn't blink. I just stood up, my cane clicking against the linoleum floor. The board isn't the one you should be worried about, Leo, I said. I tapped the hidden recorder through my shirt. The district attorney has been listening to this entire conversation through a live feed. You didn't just confess to fraud, you just admitted to premeditated attempted murder. You didn't just lose the inheritance, Leo. You just lost your life. The look of pure, paralyzing horror that crossed his face was the last thing I saw before I turned my back on him. As I walked out of the prison gates, the sun was setting over the mountains. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in my brother's shadow. I was walking in the light of the truth. It's been 6 months since that day at the prison, and the dust has finally settled on the wreckage of my old life. Leo was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder and corporate fraud, and Elena moved 2 states away after the court clawed back the assets she'd tried to hide. The family company, Miller Industries, is still in the middle of a long recovery, but the employees are hopeful again. I spent my days in my father's old office, not as a ghost of the past, but as a leader who earned his seat at the table. My legs are stronger now. I've traded the wheelchair for a single cane, and my doctors say that within a year, I'll be walking unassisted. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I was graduating college and planning to work alongside my brother for the next 30 years. I never thought I'd be the one sitting in this house alone, surrounded by the echoes of a betrayal that nearly cost me everything. But I know that our family name finally stands for something real again. Sometimes that's the best outcome you can hope for when people you love make choices that can't be undone. When the damage to a brotherhood is too deep to repair, but you can still build something functional for the people who depend on you. I was sad our family hadn't survived intact. Sad that my father's two sons ended up on opposite sides of a prison glass instead of standing together as a team. But I was proud I'd stood up for my father's right to have his true legacy preserved. Proud I hadn't backed down when Leo tried to use my own life and my own health as a weapon against me. The house is quiet now, but it's a peaceful quiet. I look at the journals on my desk and I know I've done right by the man who wrote them. My brother tried to bury me, but he forgot that I was a seed from the same tree he was trying to cut down. And seeds always find a way to reach the light.